Hi, I'm Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Today on the podcast, we're joined by Rabbi David Stav, the chief rabbi of Shoham, a community known for its largely secular population, and a leader who has spent decades working to bridge Israel's deep religious and secular divides. After the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Rabbi Stav helped found Tzohar, an organization dedicated to making Jewish life more accessible and meaningful for all Israelis. It's work that earned him and the group Israel's presidential award back in 2009. Rabbi Stav once ran for Israel's chief rabbinate with a vision of transforming the state's relationship with religion. And he joins us today to reflect on Tisha B'Av, the Jewish day of mourning that commemorates the destruction of the Beit Mikdash, the temples, as well as countless other tragedies throughout Jewish history. With Israel still at war and so many families still grieving, how do we commemorate this day? What lessons of unity, resilience, and hope can we draw from our tradition while our nation is still under fire? Rabbi Stav shares his thoughts on how Tisha B'Av can speak to this moment and what it can teach us about overcoming division, even in the midst of crisis. Here we go. Rabbi David Stav, it's great to have you back on the podcast. Thank you so much for finding the time to join us. And we are talking just a few days before Tisha B'Av. I actually spoke to you last year, also around this time, looking at the state of Israel ahead of this day of mourning, of collective national mourning that reminds us of what happened thousands of years ago, but still very much carries with it lessons. I think you'll probably tell us that very much touch upon the issues that still stand at the heart of the division that we still very much face within our nation and among our people. But also, especially now at a time of war, when the country, 22 months after October 7th, almost 2 years now, still finds itself on the battlefield, still finds itself with hostages in Hamas captivity. I'm wondering if we could start with just how do you view this Tisha B'Av? And if I borrow from the holiday of Pesach for a moment, of Passover, how is this Tisha B'Av different than Tisha B'Avs of the past?
Yes, the truth is that it's quite confusing because, there is a big difference between this Tisha B'Av and the Tisha B'Av that we commemorated last year. Last year was under the impression of the massacre that took place in all the kibbutzim and the places surrounding Gaza. And this year, we cannot ignore the miracles that we experienced with Iran, destroying the Hezbollah, invading to Syria and to... we are in a global, complete different situation. But nevertheless, I think the fact that we have 50 hostages in Hamas captivity, the fact that there is no solution that at least I could focus and foresee now in Gaza is still bothering and concerning. We see tens of thousands, if not more than that, of reserves that have to leave the families to go to Gaza. And almost every day, if not every week, we hear about people that were killed in Gaza. And it seems to be that the international situation of the state of Israel is not in its best, especially in the last couple of days, because of what's happening in Gaza. And what's concerning more than everything is the split, the divisiveness between us. I don't know if you're familiar with the results of a survey that we have just published a few days ago, that more than 50% of the Israeli society report that they stopped talking with one of their family members. 20% reported they stopped talking with two members of the family, meaning that the Israeli society is in a deep crisis, internal crisis, which is maybe more concerning and bothering than the external threat. And I will add one more thing to that. When our rabbis want to describe a healthy dispute, they describe Hillel and Shammai. That
Right.
despite the big differences between them, and they argued almost about everything, they never prevented themselves from allowing the boys and girls, their sons and daughters, to get married to each other. Today, in our survey, more than 50% of the society believes that whoever who belongs to one political party should not and could not get married to somebody that associates himself with the other side, which means that we don't understand that the common denominator is still bigger and stronger than what divides us. And that's a real reason for concern.
It's interesting. I did see that poll where 50% of Israelis said they have cut off ties with they're not talking and even considering cut off ties with family members, and largely being about politics. It's something that we thought we didn't have here, right? It's old in America already over Trump and
Right.
Democrats, and if people saying they won't even date somebody who supports Trump or supports the other side, but we're definitely starting to see that here. And the question is, because in the beginning of this war, it very much seemed that the Israeli people were coming together in a remarkable way, at least in those first initial weeks, initial months, everybody standing together, great solidarity, great sympathy, but that has worn off. It wasn't something that we as a people, as a nation, were able to sustain over time. Why do you think that was, and how do we potentially even bring that back?
I really believe that the Israeli society, strong in its heart, wants to be united and hates the disputes. I really believe that. I think what we've seen in the last couple of months is a crisis of leadership from all sides that encouraged the extreme voices of the Israeli society to speak out one against another. I really accuse the political leadership that instead of turning to their own political bases and explaining them and encouraging them not to speak in a tough way against the other side, but the opposite. We should understand that the common denominator is much stronger than all the issues that split between us. The fact that the leadership speaks in a way that encourages their political basis to see the other side as traitors or as fascists, doesn't matter what it is, it's from both sides. That's one of the issues that increased the flame of the fire that exists in the Israeli society. The second issue that is responsible for what we see in the streets and what we see in society today is the media. The TV channels from all sides. Again, I'm not criticizing one side. It's the responsibility. There is enough place for everybody.
All the numbers, 11, 12, 13,
11,
14,
12,
oh.
13, 14. They share the same responsibility for encouraging the poisoned climate in the Israeli society. Wherever I go, when I see people that somebody dares to say a position that is not the mainstream in that society, is right away accused to be whatever that side thinks about the other side. And without being ready to, let's think a bit. Maybe there is some rationale in what he's saying. Is everything that he's saying is not true? Is everything that he's saying doesn't make sense? I mean, people behave like the other position is not something that, okay, I disagree with that. It's not legitimate to think this way. It's a sin. I could think that somebody is mistaken, and maybe he's making a big mistake. It's legitimate. It's more than legitimate. It's necessary in a democratic and a free society that people should criticize one another. But we became a group or a society that sees in the other side that thinks differently. We see in them sinners. We see in them people that are traitors or are not loyal to the ethos of the Judaism or the democracy or the Jewish state, and not understanding it. We don't allow ourselves to give credit to the other side. Maybe he thinks differently. Maybe he thinks that this is what better for the Israeli future or for the state of Israel. We're not. We stick in such a narrow-minded way of thinking that we don't allow ourselves a bit of complexity, a bit of understanding that there could be a few aspects to that issue, and it's not only that one is right and one is wrong, or one is a righteous and the other one is a wicked person.
Well, no, I completely agree, and I find that people who tend to look at things in black and white terms, obviously, I've long been envious of those people because it's all clear. They know there's absolute truths. They know the answer to everything. When really I find things to be much more gray and much more complicated and nuanced in trying to see both sides. But most people don't do that. And you mentioned two causes: the political climate, leadership, the parties that are constantly using the negation of the other to explain what they are for. There's something interesting also in Israel, and this is you were touching on this, is the political parties also don't say what they stand for. They mostly say what they stand against, right? We won't let Hamas win. We won't let the left win. We won't sit with Arabs. It's always what we won't do. It's not what we will do oftentimes. But even the media is obviously also to blame to a large extent. But let's assume for a second, Rabbi Stav, those two things won't change. I don't know that they'll change. The media will continue to do what's good for the media because it's in the interest of owners of these channels to get more viewers and more money, and that's how they fill their pockets. And on the political side, halavai that one day we would have leadership that would do what's right for the people. But unfortunately, I don't see that coming down the pipeline. So if we don't have those two changes, what do we do as a people?
Well, first of all, it's true. The way you summarized what I was saying, I think is correct. And the assumption that these two things are not going to change, at least not soon, seems to be a realistic assumption. I think that we as society, and I try to do it myself, I'm not saying that I'm always successful. First of all, to use less this type of media and to try to vote for politicians that their way of talking, that their way of reacting to their opponents is not doesn't matter who is the opponent and what is the position. Before I would like to see what is the content in the realistic issues that he's dealing with. I want to see what kind of a mensch, what kind of a human being is that leader. Mm-hmm. So first of all, even referring to these two issues, media and politicians, I think that we as people should give the owners of these TV channels that the feeling that no, we want to see media that speaks in a way that resonates to us and not that causes us to hate one another. And I think that once the owners will realize that maybe they could make money and they could fill their pockets with money in alternative ways, maybe they would prefer to do it this way. But to be more realistic, I think that what I expect from ourselves is not about the politicians and not about the media, is about our daily way of behavior. And that begins with a very, very simple behaviors in the supermarket, in the traffic lights, in the shul, and in other places. How am I reacting? How am I responding to somebody that expresses his position, his views in a way that I disagree with him? And I think that each one of us should adapt himself the necessary decision that he should never insult somebody because he dared to say a position that you don't like. Not only you should not insult him, but maybe you should invite him for dinner or for lunch to know him more, to understand what hurts him and what's his pain and what his emotions are about. Every position comes from a much broader thing than just his theoretical approach about the solution in Gaza or in other issues. It comes from a much broader background. And I think that what I try to adapt to myself, whenever I see somebody that I disagree with him, and I think the second or the third step would be come for dinner. Let's sit for a cup of coffee. I think in the last two years I sat in, I don't want to say hundreds, but many tens of coffee shops with people that I met in the journey that I've done in the Israeli society, with people that I disagree with them about many things. But I said, I could tell you that I met last year one of the very, very, very tough leaders of the youngsters of the hills from the right. And on the other side, and I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to understand what's going on. And I wanted to explain him how it's perceived in Israel, how it's perceived. Violation in the name of God, okay? Chilul Hashem, what we define. So I tried to explain him what damage it makes in the world. He tried to explain me what is his approach. At the same time, I met with others that belong to the left wing. I think that each one of us, once we will start talking to each other in the eye of the eyes, and we'll talk and we'll see eye to eye people. After I spoke to somebody and I spent with him an hour of time in a coffee shop, I will not be able to curse him. I will not be able to exclude him from Klal Yisrael and to say, well, all these people are this or that. We should start learning one another. I think that's the only recipe that I could find, except for not using television and not voting for these politicians, to make our society a better society. And therefore, I could tell you, whenever I get a request from different groups to come to talk to them, and they tell me, well, 5 people from that kibbutz have started a project to meet 5 observant people. Just yesterday, I got a phone call. 5 people from that side and 5 people from that side. So I could tell myself, why should I go and spend my time with 10 people? I mean, at the same time, I could speak in other places. But when I see people that try to talk to each other and try to meet in the middle of the way from different political groups, I see this as such an important step in our curing our society, in our healing our society, that I go everywhere just to be with the people and to encourage them. That eventually I'm not undermining the disputes. I'm not hiding the differences. I don't want to be from the UN maintaining that or pretending that the differences are small. No, the difference could be big, but there is a way how to handle this dispute with respect, with love, with sensitivity, without disgracing and insulting the other. And I think wherever I will see that such a step is taken, I would want to be a part of it.
I mean, it's interesting that you talk about that, the need for conversations and for talking with one another, because that's obviously so important, something that's so severely and sorely lacking. Even in the poll that you guys, that Tzohar just did, it showed that most people don't even want to, when they get into a conversation with somebody that they don't agree with, they just walk away. They don't even try to reach the compromise. I think it was only 20-something% that even try to understand and reach a compromise in a discussion. But one of the issues that's really at the core, I think, of a lot of the division right now that we face in Israel, and I'm curious where you stand and how you discuss this, is obviously the issue of the hostages. You mentioned the 50 hostages who are still being held by Hamas, and 20 of them presumed to be alive, we hope, and 30 who seem to no longer be among the living, but whose bodies also should be returned for burial. It's amazing to me how after 22 months of this war, that there still is the hostages as a political issue. How did the lives of people become something that is politicized? It's as if somebody tells me who they vote for, I could guess almost, do they prioritize the hostages or do they not prioritize the hostages? How did we even find ourselves in such a situation when lives are on the line, right? A Jewish value is meant to be pikuach nefesh, kedushat hachayim, right? The sanctity of life, the need to save life no matter what. How do you view this, and how should we be discussing this very, very tenuous and difficult issue?
I think that's a wonderful example. I think you touched something which, and I'm saying this from a position that I belong to the group that believes that we have to make a deal, even in bad circumstances. I'm not saying in every price, because there isn't such a thing in any price, but I belong to those who want the government to go to a deal. Okay, I could easily find myself in among the demonstrators that demonstrate in favor of a deal. But it doesn't mean that I don't understand the other side. I understand the other side that could be afraid that the price of such a deal will cause us huge damages in the present and even bigger damages in the future. I understand that. I understand the fact that people think that if we want our enemies to be deterred in the next few years, they could not get out free without being killed in Gaza. I understand those who maintain that to finish the war and to get the hostages would be perceived as a loss of the state of Israel in that war. I understand that perception. And I think that we should not say, well, it's not legitimate position. It is. I remember how 20 years ago, when those, and I belong to them, that were demonstrating against the disengagement, were perceived as messianic, unrationalist, people that don't think in a normal way of thinking. I think today, 90% of the Israeli society understands, at least, I'm not saying that they are in favor or against the disengagement, but they understand that those who were against the disengagement were not people that were not rational. Right. They were very rational, and most probably they happened to be also saying the truth. Again, you could agree and disagree, but it's not something that is disgraced or a position that is not legitimate. In those times, it was illegitimate to say that. Those who demonstrated were perceived as messianic people, not rational. So again, and that's what makes the dispute in a way, and presents the dispute on the table in a way that each one looks at another. The other side, either is a messianic and is a death eater, or that he is a traitor and he wants to give up to the Hamas, and that's not the alternative. We are talking about two groups. Both of them are patriots. Both of them want the benefit and the good for the state of Israel. They see situations in different ways. Now, how it became, you asked about the political aspect of that story. I could not ignore the fact that there are those who want to take advantage because they believe that the prime minister and his government are not the right government, to take advantage of that and to try to defeat him on that area, which is a weak point, weak chain in his political policy. And I could understand the other side that thinks that if they will release and deliberate all the hostages, that will be the end of the government, and therefore they want to continue the war. I understand both political aspects. I don't want to be perceived as a naive guy that thinks only about the spiritual issues and doesn't take the politics in consideration. I understand that. But what made it political is because of politicians that wanted to make it political, or because of those who believed that through the issue of the hostages, it will be a good opportunity to knock down the government. It should not be political. It should be an issue that will be discussed in a very professional and a moral way. And as you mentioned, the value of saving lives, the sanctity of life, and these are, of course, fundamental values in Jewish tradition. On the other side, we have to mention that there are those who believe that deliberating these hostages in a price that will bring to Gaza another 3,000-4,000 murders, that will have the opportunity to begin a war and to attack us again, that's not a price that it's worth to pay. I disagree with them, but it's not illegitimate way of thinking.
It's a very tough one, and it leads me to another issue which I saw got you upset last week, which was the way the chief rabbi, the Sephardic chief rabbi, spoke about Yuli Edelstein. And just to give some of our listeners a bit of context here, Yuli Edelstein was just recently replaced as the head of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. He was that's the committee where the bill for the draft exemption that the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox parties, have been seeking to obtain and to pass in the Knesset, he was the one who was overseeing the process and the legislation of that bill, and he refused to budge on a number of key issues. And when he refused to budge, and the Knesset then went to recess and is now in recess until after the Jewish holidays, and then it only reconvenes at the end of October when a bill can potentially be brought once again, the Sephardic chief rabbi came out and slammed Yuli Edelstein, calling him an abomination, saying it would have been better had you never moved and made Aliyah to the state of Israel. Just to remind people, Yuli Edelstein was a Asir Tzion, a prisoner of Zion, someone who sat in jail in the former Soviet Union for trying to be a practicing Jew in the USSR at the time, and has since been obviously Knesset speaker and much more. I don't think what your response was personally about Yuli Edelstein, right? But this issue of, and so this is just my way to transition for a second to the issue of the Haredi draft. And as a leader of the national religious movement, of the Dati Leumi movement, which has really suffered so much loss in this war, so many soldiers who have been killed, come from schools that you taught at, come from communities that you have led, come from yeshivas where you have headed as well. And to see the ultra-Orthodox continue not to serve, to hear the way they talk about people like Edelstein, I don't even know how to think about this anymore.
I think that's a wonderful example to talk about the question, what happens to a dispute which is legitimate? Again, although I disagree completely, absolutely, I'm the opposite than Rav Yitzchak Yosef. I wouldn't make any comment about his position because, okay, he has his right to express his view about the right of yeshiva boys, and not only yeshiva boys, he doesn't even pretend to use this argument. He says for every Haredi guy, he wants the army to be for the secular or for us, not for Haredi guys. And he says that the government should release them from that draft. I disagree, but I respect the position. My comment and when I came out against him because of Yuli Edelstein wasn't because of Yuli Edelstein. Mm-hmm. But his expression was the following. This guy, Yuli Edelstein, is a son of a priest that converted to Christianity. In our Torah, we are rabbis. We are Jews. Forget rabbis. We are Jews. We are committed. We are obligated to the laws of Torah. The Torah teaches us how we run dispute, how we handle disagreement. You never use any event that occurred to parents of those who are your opponents. Let's assume that Yuli's father was the most weakened person in the world. It's prohibited. The Torah prohibited to use this under any circumstances. So you want to disagree and you want to criticize Yuli Edelstein, it's more than legitimate. Criticize him. Criticize him for his position, criticize him for his behavior. You can do it. Say whatever you think. It's legitimate. How could you dare to insult, to remind him the behavior of his father? What connection has it to our story? You added, and you are right, that he himself was a Asir Tzion. He was put in jail because of his love to Torah and mitzvot and to Eretz Yisrael. But that's a different issue. Again, by the way, although it's not prohibited, but I don't have to mention this as a legitimate argument. His position now should be discussed by itself and not with any connection, not to his past and not to the behavior of him in Russia and not to the bad behavior of his father. And that's what happens to a dispute, that instead to stick to the issue, shifts to irrelevant issues. And I think that if we want to understand what should be done now, I don't think it's needed now to go to the dispute about the draft. But I think that the problem with the draft is not the dispute as for itself, which is important and legitimate, and I have my positions, and I guess others have their own. But what's necessary is that this dispute will be done in a respectful way. Meaning that if you disagree with us, it's legitimate. Don't offend us. Don't curse us. Don't tell us that we are worse than Chilonim just because we remind you verses in the Torah that you would love to forget, or just because we remind you sources in the Talmud and other places that makes you feeling uncomfortable and you try to find different excuses why it's not relevant. You want to criticize our position? Be my guest. Don't attack us personally. The same thing is expected from me, from our people, from our side. If I have criticism, and I have, about behaviors of politicians or rabbis in the Haredi world or in the government or in the opposition, say your criticism. Say we are a free country and we are in favor of dispute and we are encouraging dispute. But do it in a respectful way. Do it with love. Do it with sensitivity to the other. Don't undermine him. Don't disgrace him. That's all what we expect. Now, just a minute to say something about the draft. I think before we go to any discussion about the content of the issue, is there a kind of release from service in the army for those who learn Torah, for those who are Haredim? Let's leave this aside. Is it legitimate that a group will not see how another tribe is collapsing? Tens of thousands of families, the wives could not continue anymore because the husbands were hundreds and hundreds of days. And you will not at least express your concern, your responsibility. You know what? Show it in your behavior in the Knesset. Turn budgets to these people instead of turning more and more budget to your communities. Do something that will show society that you really care, even though you believe that you should not go there. And the fact that we just have seen one of the leaders saying that terrible expression, your pain is your pain, and my pain is my pain. Meaning, I don't care about your pain. So what if the Tilumi people lost hundreds of soldiers that sacrificed their lives to protect the Haredi society as a part of Klal Yisrael? You don't care, it's their pain. That's the rule that we have learned in Pirkei Avot, Noseh ba'ol im chavero. that you should carry the burden with your friend? It's not his burden. The burden of Klal Yisrael is ours. You don't have anything in that. And the fact that the group releases himself from any responsibility for the pain of what's going on here, that's the problem. The problem is not the debate for itself, because that's a legitimate debate.
That's a painful one. And I want to just end with mentioning the work that you do at Tzohar, which is meant to open up religious life here in Israel, is meant to bridge those divides, is meant to try to also serve to some extent as an alternative to the chief rabbinate, which at times turns people away. We just spoke about one example of Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef's comments, but also when it comes to practice, whether it's weddings, whether it's kashrut, whether it's so many other aspects of life. So maybe we'll just end, Rabbi Stav, with getting back to how we began with Tisha B'Av once again. What would you recommend to people? Because there's lots of people who are listening to us, and some people will be fasting Sunday, some people won't be, some people will be going to synagogue and praying and listening to the Eicha Megillah, to the scroll, and reimagining the story of the destruction of the two temples, of the two Batei Mikdash. But how would you suggest to people on this Tisha B'Av that's coming up how we should be thinking about this day?
Yeah. I always remind myself the Rambam that says in one of his halachot regarding Tisha B'Av, he says that the days that we fast, it's not because we mourn the past. We mourn the present, not the past. Because a normal person could not mourn for something that occurred 2,000 years ago. I mean, it's not realistic, it's not normal, it's not rational. I can mourn something that I'm missing today, not something that occurred to my parents and my ancestors 2,000 years ago. What we mourn really is that what's going on among us now. I could tell you that we feel in Tzohar, in all of our departments, we feel a huge awakeness, a huge thirst for Judaism. And I really believe that the Israeli society wants to be more and more Jewish. Despite the issues with the dispute about the draft, despite the issues of religious coercion, eventually, the last 2 years, I think, have revealed to everybody that we are Jewish. And it doesn't matter how we define it and why are we Jewish, we are Jewish. And people want to put to that identity more and more content, to fill it with content. I think this Tisha B'Av, the major content that I would like to put for myself, for my family, for my community, is how to sustain that feeling of thirst to Judaism. How to make ourselves understanding that us observing our Judaism, being engaged to our Judaism, is a part of a story that is lasting already for thousands of years, and that it's our responsibility to continue to deliver that message to the next generation, and how we have to discover, and that's relating to Tisha B'Av more than to any other day, how each one of us is a part of that story. And we don't have the luxury to lose and to miss nobody. And everybody, even if it belongs to the other side, is a part of that story, is a part of the story of the Jewish people. And it's our responsibility to make sure that the story will be told in the next generation through all the members of this community, through all the members of that family, those who I like to discuss with, those who I feel more closer to them, and those that I sometimes prefer to keep distance from them. All of them are a part of that story, and Tisha B'Av should remind us that.
Okay, Rabbi David Stav, the chief rabbi of the city of Shoham, which I'll just mention, like I said before in the beginning, has a very large secular population also. So just talking about bridging the divide, that's a perfect example. And also the chairman, of course, of Tzohar, and so much other activities. Thank you very much for joining us. And
Thank you.
to our listeners, thank you for being with us again on this episode. You can find us, as always, on where our podcast can be found, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we will be back with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast.